Well, hi, everybody. It's so nice to have you with us for today's Parent Forum English with Dr. Eran Magen. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture that brings you this program, the Parent Education Series, of which the Parent Forums are a part. We offer these monthly in English and Spanish, and we are honored always to have with us for English events Dr. Eran Magen, who's going to be talking to you about one of our very favorite Parent Forum topics, how to support your upset child or teen. This subject is actually one of the things that got us started on these parent forums because Iran has such a wonderful way of helping parents and caregivers learn about how to communicate with their kids, and this was a topic that people really wanted to hear about.
Today is about how to support our kids when they're upset. I want to start off by saying good for you for showing up. Good for you for making time, thinking about this kind of topic. It's very easy to just let parenting happen, as life zooms by us, and just the fact that you're taking time to think about this and grow your skills, hopefully, is a big deal. You're doing a good job as parents, and hopefully this will help you do a slightly better job or feel like you're doing a slightly better job later. Anyone. Today, on the spectrum of emotional intensity that can exist when people are talking. So when people are not at all upset, that's the time to do relationship building. When people are somewhat upset, that's the time to support them. And when people are really upset, that's the time for crisis intervention, sometimes at the cost of relationship. Today, we're right here. Today, we're talking with our kid, and our kid is kind of upset, not in crisis, but also not totally green and happy, just for context. And it usually starts out with something like this. You look at your kid and your kid is looking kind of grumpy. This particular dog is fine, by the way. That's just his face, his resting dog face. But he's become quite famous for looking like this. And sometimes our kids look like this too. And the question is, so what do we do? How do we help them when we say, how's it going? And they go, "Ugh." The main concept that I hope you'll leave today with is this idea of emotional charge that the kid has inside. And when the emotional charge is big, there's strong emotions inside. They can be positive or negative emotions, but when there's big emotions going on, it's very hard for your kid or anyone really to take in any new information. And our instinct of coming in and giving advice and suggesting and changing their point of view and whatnot, it completely washes over them. There's no room. They're totally full already. So the main task, and definitely the first task that we have when we're supporting somebody who's upset, who has a big emotional charge, is to help them get less upset, less charged. And only after they release this charge do we start adding content, adding ideas, adding viewpoints, and things like that. So task one is release the charge, not solve anything. That's the main thing I hope you take away from today. Everything else now is going to be details, right? How to do this. As we begin, I also want to put a couple more thoughts in your heads, hopefully. I think, this is my personal opinion, that there's a difference between pain and between suffering, right? We stub our toe, it hurts, it's pain. We tell ourselves that we're stupid for having stubbed our toe, or we get upset with someone else for putting that table there that we stubbed our toe on. We get upset about that. That's suffering, right? That's not kind of primary sensory, this is terrible. It's more the story that we tell ourselves around it and our resistance to the fact that the bad thing is happening or the good thing is not happening. And that's most of what feels bad, is this second category. Right? Some of the first guys, some pain feels terrible, right? I mean, there can be horrible, horrible injuries, but at that point, we're not going to be doing a lot of emotional support. But most of the things that happen in the course of daily life, whether it's physical or emotional, there's some pain, and then there's a lot of suffering that we layer on top of it. And today I'm mostly focusing on how to help with the suffering. The suffering itself is, like I was saying, this resistance to reality, right? I shouldn't have stubbed my toe. They shouldn't have put a table here where people can stub their toe. This person should have treated me nicer at school. I should have gotten a higher grade. I should have practiced more before the test. I should have scored better given how much I practiced. All of these things, right? And it's the should that makes us so upset. And the should is this resistance to reality. Because reality is it did happen. But we're so unwilling to accept the fact that it happened. We push against it, and when reality pushes back, it creates a lot of suffering for us. And the way to resolve this in the very big picture, as if I'm saying this as if it's easy, but the way to resolve this is to accept the fact that it happened, right? I stubbed my toe. This is real. What do I do with my toe now? I failed a test. I should have studied more. True. I did not study enough for the test. Or I studied as much as I could have and I didn't pass the test. Maybe I'm not able to pass this kind of test, right? But there's some kind of relief that happens when we let go of the should, when we keep insisting that the world should be different than the way that it is. And once we let go of that should, we can start working more productively toward a solution, right? Um, I did not study enough for this test, and it makes sense that I failed it. How do I want to do this next time? But even this thinking of how do I want to do this next time is not really available to us when we're very busy with the should, when we have this very high emotional charge that is usually connected to a should, in my experience. And accepting an unpleasant reality, accepting that people might behave unkindly toward us or that we might do dumb things, this kind of acceptance is hard. It's hard for grown-ups. It's definitely hard for kids to do. And they are looking to us to help them generate this acceptance. Right? It's very hard to accept when pain happens to us. It's even hard to accept when pain is happening to other people or suffering is happening to other people. Because when we look at our kids and they're hurting, we feel this kind of empathy, this kind of empathizing pain, right? And we want to get them not suffering immediately, as quickly as possible. We don't accept their pain, that it's legitimate, that it's okay for it to happen for a bit. We don't want them to make mistakes because typically we pay for them emotionally, financially, with our time, whatever it is, right? And often they have problems that to us seem very easy to solve. And so our instinct is not so much to accept how they're feeling and through that model to them that how they can accept how they're feeling. Our instinct is often to try to solve how they're feeling or solve their problem as quickly as possible so they hurt less, so we feel better because we love them, and it hurts when they hurt so that we don't have a problem that we then need to fix because the solution is so obvious. Whatever it is, the instinct is to jump in, try to solve. They're still busy with their shoulds and with their big emotional charge, and we end up clashing. When in fact, the best thing that we could do at the initial stage is to help them accept their reality and through that release some charge and then come to a more constructive, productive place and then help them in all the ways that we can. This is all kind of abstract, I realize, but I'll make this more concrete. So the big questions that I'll focus on is how do we accept? How do we accept when bad things happen to us? And how do we accept when bad things happen to our kid? Trying to teach our kid to accept bad things that happen to them. Not to be passive, not to allow them to continue happening, but to accept that they happened already so that we can start processing productively rather than resisting the fact that they happen. And then how do we show our kids that we accept their experience, even if we manage to do this internally? And how do we stay engaged with them while showing this kind of acceptance? Right. So we're not just sitting there going the whole time for 20, 30 minutes. It gets old pretty fast. So how do we continue engaging with them while demonstrating this kind of acceptance? Okay, there are a lot of skills involved in this process. We're not going to cover all of them today, and I think many of them are intuitive. So they're listed here basically for your to refresh your memory. But I would divide these kinds of supportive interactions. When you talk with your kid is obviously upset, and you say, okay, this is not a normal conversation. This is now a supportive conversation. There are going to probably be three big stages to this conversation. The first, I call it setup, and it's just for us. And it's for us once we realize that our kid needs support, we become fully present as much as we can, right? Phones aside, we don't think about others as much as we can. And if we can't be very present, maybe we should postpone this interaction or make sure to come back to it when we can be fully present. So step one is setup. Step two is helping them release the charge, which we do primarily by following their lead, not adding content, not taking them to different places. We let them talk and we encourage them to talk more. And that's when the big release of charge happens. At this point, they become more creative and more kind of light, and they can come up with a lot of good solutions on their own. This is by far the most important part of a supportive interaction. I would say 80% of the benefit is here. But people usually spend just a little bit of time on this and quickly jump to the next stage, which is when we lead, because that's when we feel so helpful, right? We're actually doing things, we're giving them advice, we're sharing our wisdom with them. And I would say that when we lead, the primary goal for me, when I get to that part of the conversation, is to make sure that our power becomes more equal. That's the main thing on my mind. I don't want to be here raining advice down on my son. I want to turn this into a conversation that's as much as possible equal. And again, I'll give you some concrete examples. But the goal of doing this is to help him feel and experience autonomy and agency, and that he has the ability to solve his own problems. These are a whole bunch of sub skills. We'll cover some of them, not all of them. Everything in the setup stage, I'm not going to talk about at all. These are all things that you know. It's just a reminder, right? Once you flip the switch, be there, be present with your kid. The thing that I do want to talk about a whole lot is the following stage and the skills involved in it, and specifically this skill of wigging or paraphrasing. WIG is an acronym for what I got. They talk and we tell them back what we got. Arguably, oldest trick in the counseling book, but really something that everybody can do all the time with one another, and is super helpful when the other person is emotional. So a WIG, like I said, the acronym is what I got. They tell us something, we say back what we got from what they said. We use our own words. We say this in a caring and accepting way, and we keep the spotlight, the focus on whatever it is that they talked about. And that's all we do for a chunk of the conversation. I'll show you examples of what this looks like. And it feels like we're doing nothing, but we're doing so much. And they're getting so much more comfortable and so much less upset. It's amazing to see how it works when done well. We're not doing any of these things. We're not interrogating, we're not interpreting, we're not promising, we're not giving advice, none of those things. We're just saying back what they said to us. This idea of the spotlight is really important. When people are upset, when we're upset, we want to express the upset. We want to talk about what's upsetting for us or show it or something. We want other people to know and to understand and to care and to believe. And the spotlight is the current focus of the conversation, right? And it's through the spotlight that I will express my charge. And so we want to keep the spotlight exactly where our child put it, because our child will put the spotlight as close as comfortable to the issue that's actually bothering them. And initially, they may not be comfortable exactly naming what it is, or they may not know exactly what it is, but they will move the spotlight bit by bit if you're tracking very closely until it's right on the thing that's bothering them. And then the charge goes out through that illuminated space. You can also think about it as a wheel and ask yourself who's driving the conversation. So in that stage, the following stage, your kid should be driving the conversation, not you. Yeah, you're in the passenger seat. And that's where majority of benefit happens again, because your kid will drive you around, scary as the thought may sound. Your kid will drive you around to all the upsetting things, talk about them, release the charge as you're clearly listening and caring and paying attention while you bear witness basically to what your kid has gone through. And only at the end, you might switch seats, maybe, but that's at the end when you move on to the leading phase. The idea is that your kid will say something and you say it back to them, and the kid goes, yeah, exactly. And every time they say, yeah, exactly, you got it, their charge goes down by 1 point. And then they say some more. And then you say, oh, was this and this? They go, yes. And then they add some more information. And then you again say, oh, so it was like this. And they might go, but it's not exactly this, it's more like that. But as long as you're trying to connect and to understand without changing their story at all, they keep talking, their charge keeps going down. They feel connected with you, you care, they share their story, somebody sees them. And eventually they'll get to this point where they're a lot less upset. We'll talk about how to know when that point arrived. So here's some examples. Let's say that like we're dropping in mid-conversation, right? And let's say your kid says, I have no idea what's going on in math. I was following until a little while ago, and then they start getting into integrals or whatever. And I don't know what's going on. Math is stupid anyway. I hate it. Right? So what might you say in this moment of a conversation if you're trying to actually wig in this example? Right? So here are some common things that people say. I don't blame you. I hate math too. Right? it's sort of a nice thing to say, but you're kind of talking about yourself now, not about the kid, right? Not about the issue that's going on there. And it's not exactly reflecting what the kid was saying either. You might say, have you talked about it with your teacher? Which is great advice. But if your kid is upset, it's likely that your kid will say, the teacher hates me. He always tries to make it seem like I'm making trouble, or like you'll just get resistance. This is one of those things that it's a very good idea, but the wrong time, right? Giving advice to people while they're upset rarely works. Usually they'll reject it because they're upset. They just need to be upset at something. And if you present a target, that's what they'll be present with. That's what they'll be upset with. You might say, so math what was making sense to you until you got into this integral thing? And I would say that's a decent wig. You're just checking that you're understanding what your kid said. That's basically the essence of a wig, of what I got, is you're saying, am I understanding you correctly? And your kid gets to say. So often it sounds like a question, right? So you're saying you were following math, but then it got hard like a month ago. Then who knows what your kid will say? Your kid might say, yeah, I wouldn't say I was getting it. Like it was sort of slipping away for a while now. Or your kid might say, yeah, I was totally on top of it. And then bam, like all of a sudden it's gone and I don't know what to, and they're still talking and they're expressing charge. Great. So that's a wig. Or you might say, bah, I'm sure you can figure it out. You're so smart, right? Which maybe is expressing faith in your kid. Or maybe it feels to the kid like you're minimizing the problem. At any rate, it's still kind of pushing a little too fast toward a solution, right? When your kid is still upset, and task one is just to help them express the charge. Here's another example of what this looks like. If your kid says, I think I have too much going on. I became president of 3 clubs and I joined the cheerleading team. And then I'm preparing for the tryouts for the marching band. And, it used to be fun, but now it just feels like a lot. This is way too much. So but you might say? You might say, yeah, you probably did take on too much, right? You're a classic overachiever. I mean, depending on the relationship, maybe that works, maybe not. But it doesn't really move the conversation uh, very far forward in terms of the kid feeling kind of unjudged and open and able to express. You might give some great advice. Can you figure out which commitments aren't so important? Or just, prioritize them and figure out how much time each one takes and then remove commitments until you get to the right amount. And that's, again, great advice, but the timing is wrong if your kid is upset, right? If your kid is upset, your kid will find some fault with the solution that you presented, and then we'll start fighting with you about it, which is not what you want, right? So maybe save this one for later. You can give this advice, just not when they're actively upset. Or you might say, you're probably just a little tired. Just get some rest and you'll feel so much better. Solid advice, right? When I'm tired, everybody's stupid and the world is a bad place. I need people to tell me to nap sometimes. But if I'm actively upset, this may not be what I need to hear as an opening line in a conversation, right? So again, good advice, maybe just for a little bit later. Or you might wig. This would be an example of a wig. So your commitments feel like they're kind of getting to be a lot, and your kid will keep talking when you say this, which is exactly what you want, right? It's amazing how little input we need to have into a conversation with a person who's upset or excited or has any kind of big emotion. We just need to show that we're present and tracking. That's it. And then they'll keep talking, the charge goes down. So you've gone through this process. They said a thing, you wigged it. They said a thing, you wigged it, and they keep going. And eventually they say, yeah, that's right. And they stop talking. And you kind of count to 5 in your head and they're still not talking. And this means that maybe they ran out of charge. And so now you can do this next thing, which is to summarize, which is it's sort of like a big wig. It's like saying the full story in a couple of sentences instead of one sentence. So you might say, so you actually used to like math. You remember liking math in elementary, but now in middle school, it's been getting kind of harder and harder. But instead of it being like fun and exciting, you realize that the the fact that it's difficult is kind of off-putting for you, and now you're just afraid the teacher will call on you when this happens, and you just want to have as little to do with math as possible. Is that right? That's a summary, right? And maybe this took 10 minutes of conversation for you to get all this from your kid. And when you do a summary, one of two things will happen. Either your kid will say, yeah, that's exactly right. And you know what? I don't understand why they're forcing us to do it because blah, 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 no, no, no. And that they kind of get recharged, which is fine because you know what to do when that happens. You just wig again and eventually they'll calm down. But usually this is kind of a level two. This is or a layer two. Like you should congratulate yourself if you gave a good summary and your kid like wants to talk more because usually what happens now is they'll talk about something a little deeper and a little more vulnerable, right? Who knows? From the math thing, they might say, yeah, and there's this like other, there's a girl there that I'm really trying to impress and it's really embarrassing. Or they might say, yeah, now I don't know. I've been talking all this time about wanting to be an astronaut and now I don't even know that I want to do that. And now I don't know what I want to be. Or they might say, yeah, and I'm really worried that, dad will be upset with me when blah, blah, blah. It's usually a deeper layer that gets discovered after that first summary. So that's great. Or you might give a summary and your kid might say, yep, you got it. That's exactly right. At which point they're done being acutely upset and maybe they're just kind of generally upset, but they'll seem calmer, they'll seem more thoughtful. Um, I have it's a short story. I hope you'll indulge me. 'Cause what can you do? I guess you can just log off if you don't want to indulge me. But I hope you'll indulge me. When my kid was maybe 3, I think about 3. I came to pick him up from kindergarten and we were walking outside and he said, I'm going to open the doors. And he ran forward to the double doors. And another kid saw him going and kind of intercepted and got to the doors first and opened the doors first. And my son was very upset, very, very upset. And all the way to the car, he was very upset, crying and shouting. And then we sat in the car and he was still kind of upset, sometimes crying. And he kept repeating, I wanted to open the doors. He wouldn't listen. He didn't hear, he didn't listen to my words and so on. And I was like, this is an important moment, right? Because otherwise, how do I talk with you with a straight face about this? And I realized I really need to do the thing. And so I started wigging. He said, I really wanted to open the door. And I said, it was very important to you, huh? And he was like, yes, yes, I was ready. I wanted to open it myself. And I said, you wanted to do it alone? He said, yes. And then this kid came and he wasn't listening to my words. And I said, so, so you wanted the other kid to not open and you told him to not open, but he still opened the door. And my son went, yes, yeah, we did this. I kid you not, for like 15 minutes. There was not a lot of content there, but I just kept going like this. And then at some point he goes, that's right. Why am I feeling so much better? He was like confused about it, right? But like it sort of like clicked for him in real time. And that was a very important moment for me because now I can be here and talk to you about this with a straight face. But he went exactly through this process and then realized it in the end. And that was obviously like a very concrete, specific 3-year-old kind of problem, but it sort of works that way in general, including with grown-ups. So once our kid is calm and we summarize and our kid goes, yep, that's right. Then we can move on to everybody's favorite stage, which is when we lead, when we start contributing. And like I was saying before, I strongly advocate in favor of making our primary target here be equating power with our kid because we're coming in at such a power differential. Not only are we parents and big and have money and all of this, but also they just were vulnerable to us for minutes, long minutes, and shared like upsetting things. And that already creates a power imbalance just by itself. And so I want to make sure that if I'm going to suggest or do anything with my kid decides whether or not to adopt it and feels empowered to say, nope, that's not going to work. So we can keep working at it, right? Because if I have too much power, all my kid can say is like, yeah, yeah, sure. And that's not helpful if my kid doesn't really believe that. So a couple of things that you can do, like real quick sort of relational judo moves. One is before you start driving, ask for permission, right? It's a very explicit 3-second thing. You give your summary, and the thing happened, and ever since then you don't want to hang out with Jody. And your kid goes, yeah, that's right. And you sit there and you count to 5, and your kid still isn't saying anything. So you're like, okay, I guess he's done. So then you might say, um, can I tell you what I think? That's asking for permission, right? Can I share a couple of suggestions? Or can I ask some questions? Or things like that. These are all asking for permission. If they say no, no, fine. You say, thank you for sharing all this with me. If you want to talk more, I'll be right there in the living room doing important adult things on my phone. and you leave them alone. And they will have gotten tremendous benefit from that conversation already. But most of the time, after you listen so well and for so long, and you ask this so nicely, can I share some thoughts with you? They'll say, sure. And then I would suggest that you admit your ignorance, something like, so, you told me some about this, and of course, I mean, I've seen you go through it for the past couple of months, but I don't know everything going on, right? There's probably a lot of information that I'm not aware of. And here we already open a place for a kid to come back and say, yeah, there's something important that you don't know, and then they can add information, which is good. I want more information. And then I'll give my advice. So this is kind of in the wrong order, but it worked for the acronym. Um, so I'll say, can I share some thoughts? And my kid goes, sure. And I say, okay, listen, so I realize I don't know everything about this, but from what you said, it sounds like it may be a very good idea to blah, 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 go talk to this person, maybe avoid doing this or consider more of this. What do you think? Would that work? Are there kind of obvious reasons why it wouldn't? I'm asking my kid explicitly to agree or disagree. So my kid feels invited to say, but I don't think that could work, or there's like a big problem with this thing, or to say, yeah, I think that could work, right? But I want my kid to say, this is not a good idea, and here's why. So we can keep working at it, right? Rather than for me to give the answer from on high and for my kid to say, okay, and then walk away and just ignore it completely, right? Because conversation wasn't invited. So I think super important to equate power and then continually signal that I'm looking for my kid to be an active participant in the solving. Okay, I think that's everything. We'll discuss all this. There will be no quizzes. But I did want to say two things really quickly before. So there are these two websites that I run that Charlene mentioned before. One is called parentingforhumans.com and one is called divorcingdads.org. Uh, you can probably guess what what each of them is for. The Divorcing Dad specifically is a website with resources for to help dads stay connected to their kids and ideally co-parent peacefully and just live a good life. Many dads get very disconnected from kids in the process of divorce, and I think to the detriment of everybody. And so if you are, or if you know people who might be helped by this, by all means, share with them. You can go to the website, sign up to the mailing lists. You'll get blog posts. You'll get notifications about future workshops like this that are happening. We have a parenting group that we run every couple of weeks. People can meet and just talk about these kinds of things. Just sit and strategize a little bit, think what's going well, what's going not well, what do I want to change, what do I want to work on, and just have a second to sit there and be intentional about what we're doing as parents.